First, we're going to make a magic ring. Place the yarn tail on top of your palm, and then wrap the yarn around your 2 fingers, making sure that the strands cross over each other. Hold the working yarn between your ring finger and pinky finger to keep it in place. Now insert your hook under the first strand. Catch the second strand and pull it underneath. Twist your hook to secure the loop. Then yarn over with the working yarn and pull it through the loop. The magic ring is now complete. Next, we're going to work 7 single crochets into the magic ring. So insert your hook into the ring, make a yarn over, and then pull up a loop. Yarn over again and pull through both loops on your hook to complete your first single crochet. Now place a stitch marker into this first stitch to mark the beginning of the round with a green stitch marker. Make 6 more single crochets into the magic ring for a total of 7 single crochets. Now let's count our stitches to make sure that we have the correct number. Starting from the stitch marked with a green marker, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So now that you have 7 stitches, remove your hook from the loop and pull on the yarn tail to close the magic ring. Insert your hook back into the loop and finish the round with a slip stitch. Insert your hook into the stitch marked with a green marker and then make a slip stitch. Now here's a tip that I like to use when crocheting in the round. After making the slip stitch, pull it really nice and tight until it becomes very small as shown in the video. This helps hide the join and give your work a much cleaner finish. Now place a red stitch marker into the slip stitch. I like to use a different color so it's easy to tell the slip stitch apart from the regular stitches. Now let's proceed to round 2. Begin by making a chain 1, and then same technique with the slip stitch. Pull this chain stitch really nice and tight, and this is going to help give us a cleaner seamless join. For round number 2, we'll work one increased stitch into each of the next 7 stitches. So this means we're going to make 2 single crochets into the same stitch. So into this first stitch, make your first single crochet. And then mark the stitch with a green marker as it marks the beginning of the round. Then make one more single crochet into the same stitch to complete the increase. So increase into each of the next 6 stitches until you get to the end of the round. The last stitch of the round should go into the stitch before the red stitch marker. As you reach the end of the round, you'll notice that your final increase goes into the stitch just before the red stitch marker. So the red stitch marker indicates the slip stitch, and the slip stitch does not count as a stitch. So we will not work into that stitch marked with the red marker. Now once you have reached the end of the round, count your stitches to make sure that you have a total of 14 stitches. Start from the stitch marked with a green marker and count all the way until you reach 14. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. Now remove the red stitch marker and then make a slip stitch into the first stitch of the round marked with the green marker. Pull the slip stitch nice and tight and then place the red stitch marker back into the slip stitch. Now for round number 3, begin with one chain stitch and then pull it nice and tight. For this round, we're going to work 1 single crochet and then 1 increase for a total of 7 times. So work 1 single crochet into the first stitch and then mark it with a green stitch marker. And into the next stitch, make 1 increase by working 2 single crochets into the same stitch. After completing the first repeat, you should have 3 stitches on your work. Repeat this set for another 6 times. So make 1 single crochet into the next stitch and then 1 increase stitch into the next. Your last stitch should be worked into the stitch just before the red stitch marker. Now count your stitches beginning from the green stitch marker. You should have 21 stitches on your work. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Remove the red stitch marker and make a slip stitch into the first stitch of the round. pull the stitch tight and place the red stitch marker back into the slip stitch. Now on to round number 4, we're going to start by making 1 chain stitch. And we're going to pull this stitch tight. Now for this round, we're going to work 1 single crochet, and then 1 increased and 1 single crochet. And we're going to repeat this set for a total of 7 times. So make 1 single crochet into the first stitch, and don't forget to mark this stitch as the beginning of the round with the green marker. Next, make 1 increased stitch into the next stitch, which means to make 2 single crochets into the same stitch. Next, make 1 single crochet into the next stitch. Now you should have 4 stitches on your work once the first repeat is complete. Repeat this set for another 6 times until you have reached the end of the round. So your final stitch should go into the stitch before the red stitch marker. So make 1 single crochet, and then 1 increase into the next stitch, and 1 single crochet. Repeat that until the end of the round. Now let's count the number of stitches, starting from the stitch marked with the green marker up until the last stitch. You should have 28 stitches on your work. Remove the red stitch marker and make a slip stitch into the first stitch of the round. Pull the stitch tight and then place the red stitch marker back into the slip stitch. Now for round number 5, as always, begin by making 1 chain stitch and then pull the stitch tight. Now for this round, we're going to work 3 single crochets and then 1 increase And we're going to repeat this set for a total of 7 times. So into the first stitch, make 1 single crochet, and then mark this first stitch with the green stitch marker. Make 1 single crochet into the next stitch. And then another one into the next stitch for a total of 3 single crochets. Next, make 1 increase stitch into the next stitch. By the end of the first repeat, you're going to have 5 stitches on your work. Now repeat this set for another 6 times until you reach the end of the round. So make 3 single crochets, 1 increase until you reach the end of the round. Now count the number of stitches, starting from the stitch marked with a green marker up until the last stitch. You should have 35 stitches on your work. Remove the red stitch marker and make a slip stitch into the first stitch of the round. Pull the stitch tight and place the red stitch marker back into the stitch. Now moving on to round number 6, we're going to start by making 1 chain stitch, and we're going to pull this stitch tight. Next, we're going to make 2 single crochets into the next 2 stitches, and don't forget to mark the first stitch of the round with a green stitch marker. Next, make 1 increased stitch into the next stitch, and then 2 single crochets into the next 2 stitches. So repeat this set of 2 single crochets, 1 increase, and 2 single crochets for another 6 times until you reach the end of the round. Once you've reached the end of the round, count to make sure that you have 42 stitches, starting from the stitch marked with a green marker up until the last stitch. And then remove the red stitch marker, make a slip stitch into the first stitch of the round and pull it tight. Then place the red stitch marker back into the slip stitch. Now for round number 7. We're going to begin with 1 chain stitch and we're going to pull this stitch tight. Now for this round, we're going to work a repeat of 5 single crochets and 1 increase. So make 5 single crochets into the next 5 stitches, and don't forget to mark the first stitch of the round with a green stitch marker. Once you have the 5 single crochets complete, make 1 increase stitch into the next stitch to complete the first set. Repeat the same set for another 7 times until you have reached the end of the round. By the end of the round, you should have 49 stitches on your work. Now count to make sure that you have 49 stitches on your work, starting from the stitch marked with a green marker up until the last stitch. Remove the red stitch marker and make a slip stitch into the first stitch of the round. Pull the slip stitch tight and place the red stitch marker back into the slip stitch. Now for round number 8, we're going to begin by making one chain stitch and we're going to pull this stitch tight. Next, we're going to make 3 single crochets, 1 increase, and 3 single crochets. So make 3 single crochets into the next 3 stitches, and don't forget to mark the first stitch of the round with the green stitch marker. And then make 1 increase into the next stitch. And then 3 single crochets into the next 3 stitches. Once the first set is complete, you will have 8 stitches on your work. Repeat this set for another 6 times until you have a total of 7 sets, and you should have 56 stitches on your work by the end of the round. So make 3 single crochets, 1 increase, and 3 single crochets until you get to the end of the round. Now let's count to make sure that you have 56 stitches on your work, starting from this stitch marked with a green marker up until the last stitch. Remove the red stitch marker and make a slip stitch into the first stitch of the round. Pull the stitch tight and place the red stitch marker back into the slip stitch. And we're going to move on to round number 9. For round number 9, we're going to begin by making 1 chain stitch and we're going to pull the stitch tight. For this round, we're going to make 7 single crochets and then 1 increase. So make 7 single crochets into the next 7 stitches. And don't forget to mark the first stitch of the round with the green stitch marker. Once you have the 7 single crochets complete, make an increase stitch into the next stitch. By the end of the first repeat, you will have 9 stitches on your work. Repeat this set for another 6 times until you have a total of 7 sets. Now count to make sure that you have 63 stitches on your work, starting from the stitch marked with a green marker up until the last stitch. Remove the red stitch marker and then make a slip stitch into the first stitch of the round. Pull the stitch tight and place the red stitch marker back into the slip stitch. Now that we have 9 rounds complete, we're finished with the base of the pouch and we can move on to the sides. But before we continue, let's quickly check the size of our base. Take your frame clasp and open it up. Then place it over your crochet base to make sure that the size matches. The base should fit nicely inside the opened frame clasp. If you want to check with a ruler, the base should measure about 8.5 centimeters in diameter. So if your base is smaller than this, your stitches might be a little bit too tight. You can try going up 1 hook size, so instead of using size 6 or 3.5 millimeters, maybe you can switch to size 7 or 4 millimeters. Now if your base is slightly larger than this, your stitches might be a little bit too loose. In that case, try going down 1 hook size. So instead of using size 6 or 3.5 millimeters, maybe you can downsize to size 5, which is 3 millimeters. Now let's proceed with the side of the pouch. So for round 10 up until round number 28, we're not increasing anymore. we're just going to make one single crochet into every stitch around. So you will have 63 stitches at the end of the round. So make one single crochet into each stitch around. And don't forget to mark the first stitch of the round with your green stitch marker, just like before. Once you have counted your stitches, remove the red stitch marker and make a slip stitch into the first stitch of the round. Pull the slip stitch tight and place the red stitch marker back into the slip stitch. Now repeat this same round until you reach round 28.